Welcome to the Pastor and Postmaster podcast. What you wanted to hear in the sermon, but you didn't hear it.
Where the Academy meets every day.
Boing. Hi.
Hello. Well, we're talking about a weighty topic today, which is abortion, because it's something that is always at the front of our nation's consciousness. It was a huge part of our contemporary politics, still is. And I really want to, there's so many ways we can go in this particular direction with this issue. But I want to just point out something that I think we're going to try to hit on today is why does it still exist?
Abortion? You mean as a...
Yeah, why does it exist in the West? I'll say our nation, but specifically beyond. I want to go beyond. I want to say like about legality. Why does it still happen at all? Mm-hmm. That's the thing I want to talk about. Well, I want to give a few stats here on that. According to Pew Research, kind of like the standard respected religious and just polls in general, social issues, only 19% of Americans support abortion on demand throughout pregnancy. 42% say abortion should be broad, quote, legal with some exceptions. 29% say it should be broadly illegal with some exceptions. And 8% say it should be illegal, no exceptions. 56%, quote, say how long a woman has been pregnant should matter in determining when abortion should be legal. A Marist poll from 2023 found that 2 in 3 Americans want to limit abortion the first trimester. And then a November 2023 Harvard/Harris poll found 73% of voters would limit abortion to the first 15 weeks. Another poll found 2/3 of Americans support imposing a 24-hour waiting period between meeting with a provider and obtaining an abortion, and 70% believe that abortionists should be required to notify parents before performing abortions on girls under the age of 18.
Okay, so I have an observation based on those statistics and other things that I've read, and maybe you can help me out, Ryan, because this seems counterintuitive, or it seems like to counter reality. In the United States, we have one political party that supports abortion without any restrictions. Generally, I mean, they're,
you could probably deduce what party that is.
But based on what you've just told us, and staying away from the hot button or a label that might incite people, wouldn't it be safe to say that most Americans are life affirming?
Yeah, I think so.
But not politically, or not?
Yeah, I think it's a good example, and it strikes the core. Kind of what we want to get at is I think it changes when it's an existential concern for you or a family member. And so, yes, I think there is, I guess I'd say, a mushy middle of people who are not the 8%, which I guess with the right qualifications, put myself in that 8% category. No exceptions. I mean, anytime you're saving a mother's life, by definition, that's not an abortion because, that's just what you do in medical care. You have to decide, make choices.
So in the current evangelical sort of lingo, you would be an abolitionist?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It does not go far enough in our legal system. And that's kind of why we vote the way we vote, as pro-life as possible.
But at the same time, an abolitionist. But how about legislatively? So, like our representative is Kevin Kiley.
Yeah, Kevin Kiley.
So we would.
And he would not be an abortion abolitionist.
No,
for sure.
And so we would kind of favor at least some sort of compromise or something in the legal sense, or but.
Yeah, and it does seem, it's a great question, Bo, because there's often like this, it goes back to, I think slavery, which in many ways it parallels that issue in our time, 150 so years past the abolition of slavery in the United States, but abortion is an issue of that magnitude, both divisively and morally. But yeah, there are obviously different dimensions when you're thinking about responsibility civically, of when you can choose not to participate in protest.
And when you're talking legislatively, you have to get into the, this is a 4-letter word for me, pragmatism. I can't spell, but I'm not. I don't consider myself a pragmatist, but there is a reality there that
and Democratic.
There's going to be some give and take. So
Yeah, and that's basically the only option you have, as opposed to becoming some form of zealot. That I guess would go to violent revolutionary means on either side. You could see how that Jesus brings in the zealots.
well, in my life, I don't want to go into great detail because that's not what this is about. But I came of age in the 70s, and I was always, before I became a Christian, I was live and let live. I knew that abortion was out there. It was never going to affect me. I wanted to get married and have children, and most people I knew wouldn't think of getting an abortion. It was less than ideal. But I was pretty live and let live about it until about 1980. So
Wow.
So I was not very unique in the evangelical world. I was mirroring the evangelicals,
Yeah.
even though during a lot of that time I was not one. And so around 1980, that's when you see this shift. And so my wife, myself, my family, we were, I can remember Operation Rescue and my sister-in-law getting arrested down in Los Angeles. And,
Wow.
And I was really wrestling with that. Am I going to, because you would hear the arguments, if you could have stopped the trains going into Dachau
Dachau.
or something, wouldn't you do that? And so there were a lot of us that were going, well, do I, really get into civil disobedience or even more, like Operation Rescue, people that went to prison and so forth. So
That's a great question, the civil disobedience, which is obviously the Christian position, long history, as opposed to like revolutionary violence, which is not a part of the Christian ethics or scripture. But the civil disobedience takes serious the personal cost of that.
right, and it's different than violent revolution because in civil disobedience you say, I am going to say no, I am going to disobey, and I'm going to pay the consequences. I'm going to
Consequences
go
of
to
it,
jail.
It's a type of somewhat martyrdom without
Yeah.
total death.
Right.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think right now, and one of the reasons with this podcast we're trying to talk about too is you have these abortion laws that have passed in red states, of course, Republican states. I think you've kind of reached this point of equilibrium where you've kind of gone as far as you can go. That one amendment failed. I think it was Amendment 4. It was called. It failed to reach that 60% threshold, and that kept one of those heartbeat laws. Many of them in other states have. So right now the question is, well, what about the remaining part of the country that is in that mushy middle? The 15-week group, the 24-week group, if you want to call them that. How do you work to convince this point? Because it's not going to be an externally legislated thing. It is a transformation part.
Well, and I think, quite frankly, I was surprised when Roe was overturned.
I was too.
But at the same time, when it was overturned, I was not surprised that Christians had kind of lost their game as far as persuasion. It seems like Christians, evangelicals anyway, had put so much energy into legislating the issue and trying to influence people through on a large scale through media and so forth. Because I remember earlier in my life, it was very much a one-on-one moral persuasion. And I think evangelicals were caught off guard when Roe was overturned in that, these laws were not going our way in these different states. And it's like, well, we kind of dropped the ball.
Well, you're kind of having to unwind years and years of just being used to just the legislations there, and laws are getting more radical and more radical. So kind of we were shell shocked because we're like, well, we've been in this position for quite some time now. Doesn't seem like a plausible thing.
I was watching so today I was getting on YouTube and watching some old videos and so forth, and evidently one had just come out on PBS last year, but it was they brought out this I think it was a news organization in Boston had done a panel with people from the pro-life movement and people from Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers in like 1993.
Oh, wow.
Where they sat
30 years
down
ago.
and dialogued. And they were saying, we're just talking past each other. We're calling each other names. And there was this group that got together underground like 120 times, getting to know each other before they came out publicly and started making these videos. And so I remember that happening in Nevada County in the early aughts. Is that what you say for the early 2000s?
Early
Where
huts. I don't remember that.
we'd been pounding on each other, and by that I mean, in the letters to the editor and in the community,
op-eds, yep.
yeah, going back and forth, and finally these groups were getting together with the Crisis Pregnancy Center and pro-choice groups, and just going, hey, let's find some common ground, and try to prevent unwanted pregnancies, things like that.
Yeah.
So I think there was more rapprochement, or is that the term? Or there was a little more dialogue, but in the last 10 or 15 years, to me, it's just been, nope, we're not talking.
Yeah, it is difficult to talk about
We're going
that.
to go to the courts. We're going to go to the legislature.
Or
Well,
we're
in the
gonna-
church too, we don't want to offend people by talking about it in our churches.
Or your churches are so, well, yeah, on one side that, or your church ends up reflecting that.
Well, the churches
church.
I've been a part of, again, this could be a negative thing. It was just a given. We're pro-life.
Yeah, and we are
so
too
you didn't have to
officially.
talk about it a lot. If you guys would have been around, alive in the early '80s,
It was different.
It was different. It was
I'm
more
sure,
more
yeah.
militant, because the evangelicals had finally woken up.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this isn't just a Roman Catholic issue.
Yeah, the SBC, 1970, I believe, it was like 70% of pastors were kind of like moderately pro-choice.
Right.
So the denomination was more liberal, especially in the seminaries. 1980, they officially take a pro-life position, which has been the continued position since.
Well, and we can bag on them, but the fact of the matter is, when that was kind of how it was in the society at large, because abortion wasn't talked about.
Yeah,
much
they didn't have the
either.
videos.
No.
Right, and you know what? You have to, like I was saying earlier, you had to kind of unwind a little by little. You can't just punch people in the face with, because you almost have to unpeel the lemon, or what do you call it? Unpeel the. I'll
onion?
cut that out because that's totally wrong.
The
You
onion.
have to kind of unpeel the onion,
back the
right?
onion.
You have to kind of just go
The
through
layers.
and you can't. Unfortunately, of course, we are abolitionists. Is that what you call it? Abolitionists.
That's the term
Abolishers. Abolitionists.
Abolitionists, yeah.
We are abolitionists. I fully agree that we are not pro-life enough. But I do also agree that I'm obviously going to vote for the candidate in the legislation that leans more as pro-life as possible. But I think as we're looking at this anomaly that is the next presidential cabinet, I'm seeing amazing opportunities to. And I know some people disagree with me. They're like, "Oh no, you just don't vote for him. It's two evils."
Well,
Disagree.
that was this kind of a, when Trump was elected the first time even, and I heard evangelicals, going, "All right, we've got a pro-life president." I kind of did the dog cock his head when he hears a weird sound. I was like,
What?
What? He's not pro-life. He's in the sense of
Yeah.
He's in the middle.
he's just he's moderately pro-choice.
He's
He
moderately,
always
yeah.
was.
Always was.
Yeah, and so
There are
know,
very few abolitionist
no.
candidates, if any.
And yet he was
Technically.
and yet legislatively, politically, he was the most pro-life.
Right. Who's the most pliable
president.
candidate?
No, he was the most pro-life in my lifetime. I mean, like outwardly, he was the first president to go to the
Right.
the
We're
Rally
voting-
for Life. He was going for conservative justices on the Supreme Court for constitutional reasons.
Yeah, for constitutional
And
reasons.
people would say, well, he was playing the evangelicals. Yeah, he was. He's transactional. That's how he does it.
Yeah.
Essentially,
I
yeah,
agree.
which is a part of democratic politics. If you
Right.
just not partisan democratic, but just democratic in general, you have to work with majorities, and if you enter that game, that's why sometimes people are a little bit too self-righteous about people that what their private positions are versus what are winnable. It's difficult, and part of it would be you don't enter it if you're not when. Well, but
Yes.
And that's the
without
thing.
full
You can
swing.
also be doing things in your own communities. I know it's not your favorite candidate. I know you want it to be more aggressive, but you can do things in your communities. You can volunteer at pregnancy centers. You can become your own little like army in your community. Yeah.
For me, in the community I lived in, and my wife, that's kind of where I went, because I'm not I'm not a brawler. I'm not good at that. And that's not a pejorative. Like I would never do well in politics. I'm way too sensitive for that. And I mean, in like getting my
You
feelings.
should hear
hurt.
him when the camera's not on.
Yeah. What a jerk.
Just kidding.
No, but
You're a great podcaster.
but what I'm saying is, I didn't. After a while, I got tired of the fight, and I thought, you know what? I want to do something that's going to be more on the positive side. And so we got involved in the Crisis Pregnancy Center, and that sort of,
I'm sure wife volunteers in it.
yeah,
And I volunteered the same one
right.
a while back.
Yeah, so I'm not faulting, especially I'm definitely not faulting people who are out there in the fray, because
Yeah.
they're bigger people than I am.
Yeah.
That's
And that's a calling too, a vocation. I do think, I can understand, like, someone would be listening and they would think, oh yeah, it's going towards politics. But I do want to try to think a little bit about how and why, again, talking about that mushy middle, which used to be more bipartisan, and just making us think in a deeper level about what abortion is and why, most people in this country still claim to be Christians, still borrow Christian ethics, still use Christian terminology, have some version of the image of God, and yet that they defend something that's a very pagan practice. So early Christians were known for adopting exposed infants, which were basically potentially aborted, intended to be aborted infants, and they were recognized, maligned for it, praised for it, made fun of for it. They say, oh, they ate the kids in the Eucharist. And so that's been a part of what the Christian tradition has done. We should gladly, proudly, eagerly embrace that dimension. In Rome, there's a famous letter that was discovered. I don't know how long ago it was, pretty recently, last 100 years, where it's a husband in Egypt, a Roman husband, writing a letter to his wife, and he says, giving her news and updates on various things, and then he says, oh yeah, by the way, you're pregnant. If you have a woman, expose it, abort it. If it's a boy, keep it.
One second. I hear microwave.
And so with in Rome and with most paganism, it's expected that abortion's okay under certain conditions. Power.
Especially, that, and especially when you're thinking about who's going to be the heir to your estate.
Yeah.
And
Yep. If there's any kind of defect, physically, I think there's a certain type of rationality to that. And so it was a standard view, very common in Rome. And I think in most religions, there's usually abortions that are allowed for certain classes of people, for certain classes of infants. And that has been the standard. Christians were unique for opposing that. They were noted for opposing that.
yes. And so we talked about how in evangelical circles, they were mildly pro-choice for a long time until about the 80s. And that's when Harold O.J. Brown,
Oh, okay.
Everett Koop come on the scene. They start the Christian Action Council. And then Francis Schaeffer arrives, and he upholds the dignity of all human beings in all areas of life. So abortion was just another facet of that. He's celebrating he's celebrating and defending the dignity of every human being
Yep.
in all of life. And so, there are certain people that rise up in our tribe that kind of call the church to repentance. And
Yeah, at least indifference. I do think there are groups, it's good to point out too, because sometimes the abortion numbers ticking up, especially with Generation Z, have much to do with a shift, again away from the Christian faith. If you're a Darwinian of any kind, a materialist, I could understand how you could believe abortion is permissible. So people who don't believe that humans are made in the image of God, why wouldn't you?
well, and then there's economic and lifestyle, like you brought in the lifestyle
Yep.
notion. And then there's people like Malthus, who was talking about
eugenics.
overpopulation.
Yep.
And he argued that like a welfare state or free welfare was actually to
Contrary to Darwinian progress.
right. But he saw it as cruel, because he believed that that as time went on, as the population grows geometrically, the food supply was going to grow linearly. And so at some point there were going to be crises. And that never really panned out. And in fact,
It's one of those amazing surprises of, I think, confirming obviously Christian belief about God's providence. But yeah, I mean, at Malthus's time, what you would get based on crop yield, this is in the late 1700s, mid 1700s, it would have worked out like he said, but there were always these advancements.
right. But he lives on in that I think overpopulation is probably the biggest comeback I get from people is we don't need more children.
Right.
Yeah. Boy, but you're going to see, and I'll say this at the end of the podcast, you're going to see the depopulation problems happen very fast. They already are happening, and I think people don't realize in our country what it's going to be like when you have this lag and you have an aging population without young people replacing that, both for economic productivity, but even just being able to get cared for. So the magnitude of that is coming quick, and it's not something you just turn around. I do think there are groups that I think are very vocal that I would call like a nihilistic abortionist position. I have a quote here from a classic book where this word's first used, nihil, from the Latin word meaning nothing. Quite a complex idea, but he gives this description as a character named Arcadi in a book called Fathers and Sons, written in 1868. He said, a nihilist is a man who doesn't acknowledge any authorities, who doesn't accept a single principle on faith, no matter how much that principle may be surrounded by respect. So in Fathers and Sons, there's a guy named Bazarov, and he's today he's like a hard scientist. He's like, I only believe in chemistry and biology. And so he's like a revolutionary, but he's also someone who only believes in biological life. And he kind of disrespects Arcadi's family and tradition. But nihilism today, typically we think of it as almost like anarchism, where it's just this idea that eliminating life, of wreaking destruction, is its own kind of power. And so there are some groups like that. I would say abortion at any point in pregnancy, that would be the nihilistic abortionists, those that boast about it at capitals and stuff. But most people are not. That's the thing. Most people you talk to do not have that view. And so how is it that this 68% of the country that is Christian, and the percentage of those people who justify it, how is it that you can say, I believe people made the image of God, and yet say, I believe this is necessary?
Mm-hmm.
So, again, I'm the older person who lived through this kind of a change. And although I wasn't, a frontline anti-abortion protester, in big metropolises or whatever, I did talk to a lot of people. I read a lot, and you would never encounter somebody who would celebrate abortion in the 80s and 90s.
Oh gosh, no.
You would never find anyone who, if they had an abortion, I'm not saying they would speak in a way that they express shame, but it was a sad thing. It was not ideal. And so...
Safe, legal, rare.
Yeah, safe,
consensus.
legal, and rare. And so I'm sure there was nihilism back then.
More underground.
Yeah, but it was not spoken of outwardly. Nobody would say that except a few people. Maybe if I'd worked down in Berkeley or something.
Yeah, or you're up in the hills of some satanic coven.
Down on Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley, I might have encountered that.
Someone, yeah.
But
you wouldn't have
did.
celebrate your abortion or shout your whatever it is they do online and stuff. And
yeah, and if there's people listening, or someone who's done that, we're not actually making a judgment call on that. We're just observing that, because it is a reason to embrace abortion. It makes sense.
It makes sense. Yeah, it is the will to power.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think most in the church, statistically, it's the pornography statistics. A good percentage of women have had abortions in the church. I mean, I know that from my own, just people that have told me that in my congregations, and really sad. I think most of them, again, this is why the abortion laws do matter. They do make a difference for a certain percentage that will make a split-second decision and a change. And when they see the heartbeat or see the ultrasound, There's some people who would do it no matter what, but there are a big group of people who would be like, I'm out. I'm not going to do it. That 24 hours makes a difference. So yes, civic laws do change that. I do think a lot of people though they do get this idea of life mixed up, where this romantic idea, and I mean the romanticism, where there's an emphasis on feeling from the early 1800s onward. We arguably still live in that period. Where what is true, what you know, is what you feel, to use it crudely. And so you'll often hear this, like, my life is over because I'm having a child. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, your life isn't over, your biological life. There's a vision of your life that you feel will not be actualized.
That's a great distinction. Yeah, it's a vision of your life.
A vision of your life. And if you have a child, your life isn't over. In fact, you've actually brought other life into the world. You've been faithful in that way. So, but I do think, like, lives are being taken by abortion laws, meaning career, a particular path, maybe being bound up with, a man whom you didn't really want to marry or having a long-term relationship with. And so that is something that does probably affect most women who do this.
I would say so. That's 100% what was my thinking when I found out I was pregnant before I was married. That was when I was carousing. And so, yeah, I had my daughter, March 08? No, March 09. And I mean, all of this stuff wasn't really so radical, but I just knew that it was the wrong thing to do, to go in and have that done. I just was like, well, I sinned, and I mean, I knew enough to say, that wasn't the right move, and this is the consequence. And so, I mean, whether or not I was super deep in thought of my Christian life or not, I mean, Romans 1, right? It's like, It's written on my heart. So it's innate for me to say, yeah, that's obviously, I did that. And it's a life. It's obvious to me, even though there was pressure from outside to do that. I was like, I'm not going to do that. I don't care how radical they were. I was never going to do that. Yeah.
You have a clear conscience, and you have a daughter. Mm-hmm. One thing too, I would say too, like for people I know pastorally, I've had, people talk to my wife and I, one particular person, the woman had asked, well, what would you do if one of your daughters got pregnant? And my daughter's obviously 8, 6, and 3. So, quite young to think in the future, obviously. And I was like, it was kind of an interesting question because at the time, she was in a relationship, and then a couple months later, she was pregnant. But of course, I was like, oh, well, absolutely welcome the child in the world. I would never. I knew exactly what that was hinting at, and I can't miss this moment. I can't be like, it better not happen to you. That's what old school, 1960s, 50s.
Sure.
This better not happen to you.
Yeah.
Man, I remember someone said not a couple years ago, and they were like comparing my heartwarming decision to save my daughter's life to that of she's like, that's why I'm pro-choice, because you shouldn't have to, she goes, we're the same. You shouldn't have to fight over someone for that. And I was like, we're absolutely not the same. I've never felt more disgusted in my life for someone to say that to me. That was so offensive. No, I'm not the same as you. Not the same. Yeah. You call yourself Christians, and yet you are for the murder of my daughter. You would suggest to me, if I had come to you, God, thank God I didn't know you when I was pregnant. You would have told me, it's fine, honey.
Yeah.
To hell with that, honestly.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh.
Sorry, I said that.
Oh, crap.
Crap.
Why to edit all those parts out?
We are not editing that.
We were talking about that earlier.
I mean, this is a dicey thing, but look, it touches more than 1 or 2 or 3 people in your congregations.
Right.
This subject.
Well,
it's a hot one.
And we, by even making this podcast, there's going to be people that think we're insensitive, and we don't think about.
Oh, they'll
things.
think you guys are insensitive.
Well, definitely.
You're in prison to us.
Stupid.
But and I mean, I'm okay with that now. I mean, I didn't used to be. That would bother me, and it still bothers me. But I mean, that just comes with the territory. But the fact is, like Ryan, what you were saying, I've thought about those things as a father. I don't, I'm Reformed, so in my theology, So I don't have these expectations of the future that some people seem to have for their children or their life. And I've seen so many church leaders, pastors, who have changed their theology, what they think the Bible says, because their children fell into the same sins I committed when I was a kid. You know, that's not going to happen in my family or in my circle of friends or something. And nothing could be further from the truth. I believe that other people are every bit as wicked as me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
You know, they're every bit as wicked as I am.
Yeah.
And they'll do the same kind of wicked things that I do. So a child who's unplanned comes into the picture, I'm all in.
Yeah.
You know,
I think, there's a great quote I have here from C.S. Lewis in Screwtape Letters, the book Screwtape Letters. And I think he points out something very accurate. He's right, this in the 1950s, not now, but we live in the same period. I mean, kind of do. I mean, at least worldview-wise. It's from Screwtape to the under demon Wormwood. He says, I note that what you say about guiding your patient's reading and taking care that he sees a good deal of his materialist friend. So he sees him a lot. But are you not being a trifle naive? It sounds as if you suppose that argument was the way to keep him out of enemy's clutches. Enemy, of course, is God and Christ. That might have been so if he lived a few centuries earlier, at the time that humans still knew pretty well when a thing was proved and when it was not. And if it was proved, they really believed it. They still connected thinking with doing and were prepared to alter their way of life as a result of a chain of reasoning. But with the weekly press and other such weapons, we have largely altered that. Your man has been accustomed ever since he was a boy to have a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing about together inside his head. He doesn't think of doctrines as primarily true, false, but as academic or practical or outworn or contemporary. Jargon, not argument, is your best ally in keeping him from the church.
Ooh.
Different philosophies dancing around in his head. That does describe our age. Jargon.
It sure does.
Memes. I mean, memes are like even more crude than jargon. Is a phrase. I mean, a short phrase. So you get an idea. A lot of people then haven't thought about it. And a lot of people, they're not going to listen to the argument. They're going to listen to this podcast unless they know us somehow, and trust us. You know. And I think that's kind of the challenge.
They probably won't like us after they heard me say HELL. Or that Ryan has a cold and he's on here still and he's like nasally. By the way, Ryan has a cold. We're so sorry. He sounds nice. I prefer it. So anyway, back to it.
I'm older, maybe that'll
I think
be
it gives
normal.
him a real fulsome sort of voice. Sounds like he's speaking with more authority.
Yeah, that's right. I feel better. I just don't sound as great as I
He
did.
feels better.
Oh, romantic.
Also,
He's a romantic.
I will say, I didn't really really care where I stood on that. I was like, well, whatever. Probably am more pro life if I had to be, but when it faced with it in reality, I was like, absolutely. The passion in me just went, it just overtook me. You can tell I get really passionate about it. That's why.
And honestly, it's appropriate because of the magnitude of what advice you were getting, the chasm between life and death. I mean, and I agree with you.
I cannot call myself a
Yeah.
Christian.
Yep.
Look at me. I cannot call myself a Christian and be and vote pro-choice. I can't do it.
Yep.
All of me inside of me cringes at the thought. So I mean, just food for thought. Hey, don't get mad at me, man. Get mad at God, who is the author of life. We are image bearers, every one of them.
Well, but the argument we talked about the Southern Baptist Convention in 1970,
Yep.
and the argument was, I think it was Criswell who made the argument.
Yep.
It's not covered in the Bible. So
the old biblicist argument.
is that what
too.
that is?
Yeah,
Right.
there's not a.
What do you say to
and
that?
because Jesus doesn't address it infanticide, and neither do the apostles.
Well, and it's it's like it's the whole argument. Jesus
What would
never-
you say to that if someone came up to you?
Well, first of all, there are certain things that are, what is it called, from good and necessary consequence deduced from Scripture. I mean, there's a lot of things that aren't, AI is not talking about anything. I mean, you don't have gay marriage, that every once in a while someone throws that one out there. If it was so important, why didn't Jesus talk about it? It's like, because he didn't even assume that his audience would accept that.
Right.
Like it's very obvious, plus clinical abortions anyway, aren't even a possibility until anesthesia.
Yeah, and the scriptures, there's some ways of phrasing things, and I just can't think of a better
It's
way
like
to phrase
Exodus
it.
21, yeah.
Like, the Bible doesn't anticipate certain things.
Yes.
And so when you hear that, you go, wait, God didn't anticipate?
Right.
And I'm saying, no, the Bible doesn't anticipate that. I can't think, perhaps you can think of a better way, but it's like, they didn't
not-
have abortion on demand. They didn't have saline abortion at the
They
time.
had they had murder.
They didn't have organ donations. They didn't have.
had Molech.
They had Molech.
So they had principles. What you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
principle
so you have
overarching.
to argue from principle.
Exactly.
Because, they didn't have...
There's a longer quality of modern theology where there's a not as much emphasis on natural law, and there's a reaction to that in evangelicalism. With Criswell probably thinking, like God determines what a human being is, not philosophy, and so oftentimes it has to do with a potential life. Because there's always someone who says, some people didn't believe the soul even entered until the 6th month,
Right.
and it's like, but there's a definition of a human that's should be common sense, that there's a potential life that, if allowed to reach its goal,
Yeah.
comes into this world, which is true of all organic life. And so a human life certainly would fall along those terms.
Yeah.
So it assumes some design in nature. So
The minute you have a child, the minute you find out, all you do is protect that person, even though they're only a clump of cells. I don't care if it's a blastocyst. I don't care. It's still a life that I'm going to. It's just, and I argue from from purely experience. Really, I don't have all the.
Yeah, I think
know,
if
fancy.
when I think about folks who are materialists, atheists, who hold to a Darwinian type of view, there's arguments. Well, and you do have back in the day, you had feminists for life. You had atheists.
they're a very rare bird today.
Yeah, they're rare today, but you had pro-life atheists in the old days. I'm sure they're still there. It's like anything else. The nihilists weren't speaking up back then.
No,
They are now. Well, there's atheist pro-life people out there, and they've been speaking all along. And so there's good arguments for not aborting children from an atheist, materialist, Darwinian point of view. And like when I heard somebody talking about this about 2 years ago, and it came into my mind, and I started thinking about it. And when you think about taking the life or disposing of a child that you've conceived with someone else, do you realize that if you go back 2,000 years, you're connected to somebody who struggled to live, to survive.
Yeah.
who
You're indebted
fought,
to that person.
who might have, and then, if you want to use your imagination and your romanticism, you can really start thinking about it like somebody who was eking out, barely making it through, say, a workhouse in London, and survived that workhouse when 11 of his siblings died.
Yep.
And you're going to end that chain. You're going to end that DNA line.
And nihilism is an idea where it's like, I don't care if death prevails. That's kind of what it is, the nothingness, as opposed to it's opposed to being, like God is the fullness of being, and this is the opposite of being. And I mean, yeah, I do think
And people in your past would do anything. They went through all kinds of things.
Yep.
So that you and I could be here.
You and I could be
do
here.
this.
These
It's
are the
worth
most. We're talking about the most vulnerable people. Early stages on. We're talking about the most vulnerable creature on the planet. That is a human life in the womb.
Yep. One thing, the thing
Brutal.
about what the church can do, I think, is an important thing for us to realize too, is what the church can do. And this is an important thing for you if you're counseling people that are the younger and thinking about marriage, should be thinking about marriage if God's calling them to marriage, and as He called most people, He is. Is that, remember, sex and procreation, those are intrinsically they're connected. That this our modern day, because of contraception, separates those things, and it should be a part of within the scope of every sexual act, I believe. And it's not the only point, of course, but it's the central reason. And for people who have disconnected those, they think, well, contraception allows me to have sex without thinking about kids until all these things are done, but it's not really reliable. It's never reliable. I mean, that's kind of the irony, is like, oh yeah, needs to be more access to contraception, but we've had it since the 1960s, and there's been 65 million abortions in this country. So your body's made, your woman's body's made for this to happen. So the better question is, have you thought about what sexuality means? That's the real question positively you got to say.
3 more podcasts.
Many more podcasts. And I would think telling stories of, again, like unplanned, pregnancies. I don't even like that term, to be honest, because they're all unplanned if you think about it. In the absolute sense, it's not. It's mysterious. It's mysterious no matter how much we know about the body when life is born. And so if we don't think of life as like a gift, as serendipitous, surprising, then people are in a constant state of angst. Like, I need to plan everything out perfectly. And kids are the opposite of that. They are.
I think that for our culture, I think the family was broken down. And that's why we're in such a tizzy with our understanding of life. I don't know.
Well, of course, of course we are. And people are hugely influenced by those around them. If those around them, if they see someone who's had a child, like in the case like of you, in a happy ending, as much as we can all have happy endings in a broken world, that's a positive one. It's when people who think like, give doom and gloom about that makes someone think that's the only option they have. Our friends who are like, just do this.
But I was prepared to fully be a single mom. Fully prepared.
Yeah, I'm not a single
Didn't
mom.
have to. Thank God.
Praise God.
I
want to make a few predictions. Who am I to give predictions? I want to do predictions. I do think about
Are you a
what's going to happen.
prophet now?
Yeah, exactly. Not prophecies. Predictions.
Just kidding.
This is
Is this our beginning of the year thing that we're doing now?
Yep.
Okay.
I consulted the stars.
Okay.
I think what you're going to see in our country across the world is you're going to see such a strong contrast between like subcultures that emphasize life, that have a lot of children, like our evangelical churches still statistically have double the birth rate of what the country at large has. And so I think you're going to see that the cultures of death spiral more into the sadness, depression. It doesn't happen 1 year, 2 years. It's like a 20, 30, 40, 50 year. You begin to see the dramatic part of it. And I think there's going to be a way in which abortion is not the thing talked about as much anymore. That's my prediction. It'll be legal, but it won't be talked about because it's like, please, let's just have a family.
Do you think it'll just be up to all the states like it is now, or do you think they'll push further?
It's going to take a long time to change.
Well,
Okay.
To quote someone but not cite them, because I don't want to get people upset. Politics is downstream from culture. So what we've been talking about is what's going on culturally and in people's minds and hearts. The politics is going to follow it.
Yep.
And we've seen that in the last few years.
Yeah,
where the politics are starting to see things turn. And this is kind of off topic, but
He digresses.
I just saw things happening in the evangelical world over the last 15 years that I just, I'm wrong about so many things. So when I get something right, I just saw this and I was like, dude, you're giving away the store, and pretty soon the culture's going to come around and you're going to be looking like a fool. People who thought that they needed to engage the culture and that they would lose the youth if they didn't do this or that. And here the culture right now, politically anyway, and culturally, is saying, no, we don't buy that view of sexuality. We don't buy that view.
We reject that view.
We reject that view. And here you've got your website, you've got your whole mission statement of your church,
Publishing career.
and you've been left out.
Yeah.
The culture moved
Yeah.
and left you behind, and you thought you were out on the cutting edge of evangelical church planting or whatever.
It's always safe to stick with the Bible, guys.
And the church can continue to do like what it's always done, I think, in its best times and what it does according to Scripture. Yeah, for preserving life, living life, and seeing life. And I think churches are doing a lot. There are, 2,400 pregnancy resource centers like in the country.
I mean, a lot in
Oh.
California too.
A lot in California, and there's a lot of good going on. But yeah, it's at a local level. That's the long game that you got to really think
Well, I
through.
can tell
Amen.
you.
Yep.
Here's an example of me being wrong. Starting the crisis pregnancy
Rare
center in our
thing.
area. I mean, we were a counseling center first. We weren't a clinic yet.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was to counsel, and statistically, probably seeing 100 people a year or something. And so now I go to these banquets and stuff, counseling over 1,000 people, 700 women coming into the clinic, 700 visitors to the clinic who have children, and a huge percentage that went into the clinic thinking that they were going to get an abortion, but they were going for the free services and so forth. When if you go back
Fake
to
clinic.
the mid 80s, if you would have told me that every year hundreds of women would be keeping their children, I wouldn't have believed it.
Well, that is a possibly good place to close it here. I know just a positive and hopeful view just from your life, in the last 30, 40 years. So keep on, church, and
you should
talk to
you should be getting involved locally.
Yeah.
If it is on your heart.
Yeah,
I guarantee there's things close by.
You don't have to get arrested. You don't have to
get
fight with
arrested.
people.
Yep.
You
You won't get assaulted.
You don't have to.
Unlikely.
You don't have to go to pro-choice meetings and have people come out later and tell you that they thought that those people were going to kill you, which happened to me.
Wow.
They thought I was literally going to experience physical harm. And
You never did.
pretty funny story because it was totally unplanned. I just went there to be an observer with my little laptop, and they decided to go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves, and I was not expecting that. And when that happened, the meeting stopped. They told me to shut my laptop. They originally thought I was a reporter from the union,
Wow.
so they were cool with me.
What year was it?
You have reporter vibes.
I think it was around 1990.
The glasses.
It's the glasses.
And
Early.
Yeah, and
So the highest number of abortions in our country is 1990, by the way.
Whoa.
it was-
1.3 million.
It was, and I was just there, keeping it low key and everything, and they were ready to lynch me. And I'm not exaggerating. I had people come up later and say, and there was somebody there. Somebody called me the next day and said, "Hey, I heard, you had a rough time there." And I said, "How'd you know?" Because I thought they were all pro-choice there. And this person said, "Oh, we have people on the inside.
Wow, and I love
But
that.
they were ready to go after you." And I said, "Yeah, it was."
Yeah, get on the inside. Do it. Go to these things.
Well,
Educate yourself.
Yeah, like I would never surreptitiously
All you got to do is
get
put a
in,
ring in
but,
your septum and then paint your hair blue, and you can go anywhere.
well, it was it was amazing.
That was fun, guys.
Who knows?
Thanks for hanging out. That was
Thank
fun.
you. We'll subscribe, like, and
Please share.
share. And yes, we will visit you again. You will see us again.
Yes, we will see you next time on Pastor and Post.
God bless.
Bye.
Bye.
Adios.